Couple items at the top. As President Biden noted in a proclamation issued on Sunday, we are marking Holocaust Remembrance Day this week. Today, we rededicate ourselves to standing in solidarity with the Jewish people in America, Israel, and around the world, and to remembering the horrors of the Holocaust. An estimated 6 million Jews perished alongside millions of other innocent victims around the world. We honor the memories of precious lives lost, reflect on the incomprehensible wounds to our humanity and the lessons learned, and mourn for the communities broken and scattered. And we embrace Holocaust survivors, some of whom are still with us. They deserve our continued support to live in dignity. With that, short topper. I only had one today. Go ahead.
Thanks,
and a secretary.
So on the president's gun announcement, he announced he's going to ask Congress to take action to repeal gun manufacturers' liability protections.
Yes.
That had been a day one promise of his. When should we expect to see that text sent to the Hill? And if it was a priority, if it is as big a priority as he said it was for him just a few minutes ago, how much effort is the president willing to put into gun control right now when so much of the administration's focus right now is on the infrastructure plan?
Well, first, let me say that there has been legislation introduced in past Congresses, and we certainly hope, and he's calling for members to reintroduce legislation on gun liabilities for manufacturers. It is an issue that he talked about on the campaign trail, and he continues to believe that addressing that, holding manufacturers to the same account as other industries, is pivotal in keeping our communities safe, keeping our families safe, and addressing the threat of gun violence across the country. So what he is calling for is for the introduction of legislation, of which there has been past versions. I will say that this has been an issue that the president has been working on for decades throughout his career. He helped pass the Brady Bill. He helped ban assault weapons back in the 90s. He believes that taking additional steps on background checks, that putting in place an assault weapons ban again, are pivotal to keeping our country safe. He strongly supports the background check bills, the two that have passed the House. It is imperative for any president to walk and chew gum at the same time, to continue to push for, to advocate for, to use the bully pulpit of the Rose Garden to push forward a range of agenda items, and he certainly will continue to do that on putting in place common sense gun safety measures.
A couple of weeks ago, in a press conference, the president sort of said, sequencing is important here, that essentially acknowledging that maybe if the president can walk and chew gum, maybe Congress can't, and the president decided to put infrastructure before gun control, before climate change, before some of these other issues. Why are guns not going before infrastructure?
Well, Congress plays the role, the Senate and the House, in moving legislation forward. And at any given time, there are multiple pieces of legislation moving their way through committees, moving their way through the House, moving their way to the Senate. There are two background check bills that have passed the House that can move to the Senate. He certainly is an advocate for those, while at the same time being an advocate for moving forward on the American Jobs Plan.
And then finally, just a different topic on Afghanistan. Should we expect to hear from the president before May 1 about what he will do with American troops still there? I mean, it seems they're going to stay there beyond the sort of time is running out for an ordered withdrawal for troops still there. Right now, is that an accurate assessment that there will be troops there on May 2nd? And then in terms of what is the president's message to the American people? Why is it in their interest for their troops to be serving in harm's way overseas beyond this month?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the president's decision and announcement. I expect you will hear from him before May 1st. He has been consistent and clear that it is operationally challenging to get troops out by May 1, which is not a deadline he put in place. It is a timeline put in place by the prior administration. And there are certainly conditions on the ground, including efforts at diplomacy, efforts to negotiate with the Taliban, that have been underway for the last several weeks. But you will certainly hear from him, and once you do, we can absolutely have a conversation about where we go from here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Given the narrow majorities in the House and the Senate right now, does the president think enacting universal background checks this year is doable?
I think the president is going to leave the analysis of what's viable and doable to all of you and people on the outside. And certainly he's not vote counting himself, but he is also clear-eyed about the challenges in moving forward with legislation with the current makeup of the Senate. He is going to continue to advocate for that, as he did just today, just this morning in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest and most courageous advocates for gun safety legislation in the country. But he also is not going to wait. And that's why he took action on, announced several steps that can be taken in the form of executive actions, in the form of guidance, and in the form of nominating someone to lead the ATF, because he feels you can't wait, and he's going to use the power of his presidency to take steps forward.
Because this gets a little bit of what Zeke was getting at. I mean, we have a jobs cabinet now. We have face-to-face and Zoom meetings ongoing with Republicans and Democrats about infrastructure. Should we anticipate a gun control cabinet or meetings with Republicans about this issue?
I certainly would anticipate the president will raise this issue in a range of conversations he has with members of Congress. This obviously is slightly different given the role of the Attorney General in measures on gun safety, and as is evidenced by the fact that he was present there today. So it's a bit different from a jobs cabinet, but I can assure you, for members where this is appropriate, where it's an appropriate role for them to play, for members of the administration in the White House and otherwise to communicate with members of Congress, that will certainly continue to be at the top of our list.
Two other unrelated things real quick. The U.S. and Iran are engaged in indirect nuclear talks this week. Will Americans detained in Iran be part of those discussions?
Certainly, Americans detained in Iran is an issue that we have raised with partners around the world and those who are having direct discussions with the Iranians. In terms of the focus and content of these discussions, I know they'll do a readout when they conclude the meetings, likely tomorrow.
And beyond what Secretary Blinken, I know he held a meeting with families or representatives of them early on. Can you give us a sense of what else may be ongoing in this regard?
In the effort to get Americans who
Iran.
are detained, the efforts would certainly be led by our diplomats and our negotiators out of the State Department, hence your reference to Secretary of State Tony Blinken. And obviously these discussions are often raised through different channels we have with the Iranians, given the fact that we're not currently having direct talks on even issues like the nuclear negotiations, but I'm not going to have an update beyond that from here.
Tomorrow, the Army Corps of Engineers will be at a federal court hearing regarding the fate of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Is it the administration's belief that construction of that pipeline should continue?
Our view is that we would look at each pipeline through each individual pipeline separately and do an analysis of the costs and benefits on the environment and jobs, which is my assumption would be happening here. So I don't have an assessment of that, but we look at each of them individually.
Conceivably, we get that tomorrow at the court hearing.
I'm
There's a delay, I guess, in considering this, given that the administration asked for more time. So I'm sort of trying to figure out if we may get that tomorrow.
It wouldn't come from the White House, presumably, but I can certainly check if there's an expected timeline that we can share from here. Go ahead.
Thanks. Following up on Zeke's question on the manufacturer liability bill, the president just said that if God granted him one item on his to-do list, it would be to get this done, to make it so that gun manufacturers can be held liable. It is something he promised on day one. It is day 78. What's the holdup here?
There's no holdup. It just, legislation needs to be reintroduced. There are a number of members in Congress who are strong advocates for exactly what the president supports, share his view about the impact, and we're certainly hopeful and encourage them to move forward on that legislation, reintroduce it.
But the president promised to send his own plan. It's clear that you're waiting to see how this works its way through Congress, but why not put out your own bill, lead the charge on this?
He is leading the charge by advocating for this moving forward, by using the bully pulpit of his presidency and of the Rose Garden to advocate for this legislation moving forward. It is the role of Congress, of course, to push legislation forward, to vote on it, to move it through committees, and he certainly is hopeful they'll do exactly that on this issue.
The president did suggest recently that, tackling this is a long-term issue, as he put it. Given the recent shootings, does he still see it that way? Does he still see this as a long-term issue?
I think he certainly sees it as an issue that we won't solve overnight. So yes, he sees and is encouraged by the actions that we've seen across states. Take red flag laws as an example. There are 19 states. Many have implemented those laws in just the last few years. We know that they're impactful. In many places, there's bipartisan support for that. One of the announcements he made today was that we will be putting forward guidance to make it easier for states to put forward those laws. He knows that sometimes the first action doesn't happen at the federal level. It can happen at the state level. We've certainly seen that on a range of issues, and we've seen that on gun safety legislation as well. So he's encouraged by that, but knows that it can be a long journey.
Has he been in touch with Leader Schumer about the next steps forward, especially on these bills that have passed the House?
He, as you know, he's regularly in touch with Leader Schumer, who shares his commitment and concerns about the impact of gun violence on our communities, on this country, and they certainly discuss this among a range of other issues.
The president does actually have it here, the list of all the promises that he made during the campaign of gun actions that he wanted to take. Obviously, you're doing what you think you can unilaterally, waiting for these measures to work its way through Congress. Does the president feel that he's doing everything he can to meet the scope of these commitments right now?
Well, today the administration announced initial actions to address gun violence. There will be more. That is absolutely his commitment. And he also will use the power of his presidency, his voice, his political will to advocate for actions in Congress. He also recognizes that there are incredible roles to be played by many of the gun safety groups and leaders that were here today who have helped pass laws in states across the country on everything from background checks to red flag laws, efforts that have had a measurable impact in states to reduce incidents of gun violence, of homicide, of suicide as a result of guns. So he will remain engaged with those groups and those leaders as well, and he will work on this through many levers. Go ahead, Caitlin.
With these ghost guns, they can basically be bought, printed, and assembled at home. So how is the president confident that this rule can be enforced?
Well, it's a rule that is being put in place by the Department of Justice. It is certainly a step to make that more difficult, to regulate an area of gun production that has not been regulated previously. So it's something that will have to be worked through law enforcement officials around the country, through the Department of Justice.
Right, but if you're like doing it at your house, how are they going to know to be able to enforce that?
Well, there's the purchase of kits, of course, that's part of it, but certainly putting in place steps to make it more difficult, to make it harder, to regulate the ability to gain access to ghost gun kits is certainly a step forward, in our view.
Okay. My other question is on the ATF nominee. When is he expected to formally nominate David Chipman to this role?
I mean, put forward his nomination to Congress? I would expect quite soon. I don't think there's any reason for a delay of that. I will say that David Chipman, who, for others who are not as familiar with his background, because I know there's been a Twitter about him out there, but he has 25 years of experience at the ATF. He has helped with the 1993 World Trade Center bomb. He helped while he was there. There was investigations into the World Trade Center bombing and Oklahoma City bombing. He's overseen complex firearms trafficking cases, and he is a gun owner himself. So the president's view is there's no one better to lead the ATF. He's certainly looking forward to putting his nomination forward, and I expect there would be no delay in that.
Given his history as a gun control advocate, is the White House worried that this is going to be an uphill battle to get him confirmed?
Well, it's up to Congress. He's also somebody who has certainly been an advocate for gun safety measures, but he also has 25 years of experience at the ATF. He's been involved in he's played a pivotal role in investigations. He is a gun owner himself. So he has a broad swath of qualifications, and certainly we believe he's somebody who should be seriously considered by Congress.
So you're confident he can get confirmed?
Well, that's up to the Senate. The president gets to pick who he wants to nominate. He's nominated somebody who is qualified, who has decades of experience, who is a gun owner himself, and it is up to the Senate to decide if they move forward with his nomination.
My last question, is on the refugee cap that the president has proposed raising to $62,500, but he's not actually formally signed the paperwork yet. Is the White House still committed to raising that cap to $62,500 by this fiscal year?
Yes.
And so we should expect that before October. And it's not going to change from $62,500 is my other question.
I don't anticipate that. It is that it would change, I should say. It is the president remains committed to raising the cap. Go ahead.
Yeah, following on Caitlin, have you counted the votes? Do you think that Chipman can be confirmed by Democrats alone? It seems as though there may be at least one Democrat who I can think of who has a decent grade with the NRA and may not support an ATF director. Are there any Republicans that you could win over, or is this going to be a nomination that languishes like so many other ATF directors have in the past?
We're certainly familiar with the history. The president would not have nominated him if he didn't think he was qualified and didn't think he was someone that the Senate, members of both parties, should give fair hearing to, seriously consider confirming. But we just announced his nomination today, so I don't have an assessment of the legislative outlook quite yet.
Okay, quickly, when is the address to a joint session of Congress? Have you figured out that, or the logistics on that, what it'll look like?
I can't wait till we can announce this. I'm with you. We can all share a joy on that. We are still working through and finalizing the date, the logistics. The president remains committed to delivering a joint session. We're working with leaders in Congress to finalize that. We certainly hope we'll have more to say soon.
On another matter, General Motors has halted production in North America at several factories and extended shutdowns because of this semiconductor chip shortage. It's disrupting the auto industry, and I'm wondering, are there any short-term